Hello and welcome. So I have some other stuff to do tonight. I'm coming to you early, which I knew I was going to do, but I wanted to set the live stream up so that you guys at least knew my intent to do a second part to the fullness of the Gentiles. What is it? So hello and welcome. I wasn't exactly sure the direction I was going to take. I was all over the place in a whole bunch of scriptures last night, getting to the bottom line is the fullness of the Gentiles. What is it? And specifically, when is it? Because I know that is a question that a lot of people have. And I actually, probably going to lose my spot, but I got a comment from Mike. So thank you, Mike, because this was a perfect comment to lead into the video tonight to continue the discussion of the fullness of the Gentiles. What is it? To add additional support explanation. And if you heard that noise, that is my cat running around like a little maniac. So I apologize. But let me find the notification that Mike sent me. Okay. So he said, it's so funny. All along, I had been thinking that the age of grace and the fullness of the Gentiles ended on the same day. A lot of people do, and I was one of them until I actually started really researching this and not just accepting the popular opinion, I guess. But when you actually start to research it out and understand the sequence of events, it's got to do with Israel and the blindness being cast and then being removed in order that they can come to saving knowledge before the Lord comes back. So, that's kind of where we're going to, and that's the point that I made, but I wanted to get into additional details to help support this statement that I made. So anyway, but not so. No, not so. The age of grace and the fullness of the Gentiles do not end on the same day. My current understanding is the rapture of the church will end the age of grace. God's focus switches to Israel and his chosen people, though many will become Christ followers after the church departs. That is true. And the return of Jesus Christ at the second coming marks the fullness of the Gentiles. Yes, it does. There will be plenty of Gentiles running amok until the very end. And that is also very true. So thank you for that comment, Mike. I truly appreciate it. And yes, he is absolutely right. And that's what we find when we go to specifically the book of Revelation. And it's actually fortunate that I had just gone through this because I found a lot of this information out as I was researching to go through the book of Revelation. Really just became clear. So we understand from the sequence of events as given in the book of Revelation that, yes, Gentiles will be running amok all through the 70th week. In fact, Revelation 11 specifically calls this information out. And some of this information that I'm sharing with you will be reintroduced from what I stated in the previous video, what I read from the Bible in the previous video, just to kind of refresh memories if you had forgotten or if you didn't watch the other video. But Revelation 11:1 and 2 specifically come out and state that Gentiles will be running amok up until the second coming. So the fullness of the Gentiles or the completion of the Gentiles or things like that can't happen until Israel is front and center truly and eternally. And that does not happen for real until the millennial kingdom. See, we have this idea that because Israel will return to the fore, that God will switch his focus from the church after he removes us in the pre-trib rapture. And then the 70th week will be shifting his focus back to Israel. Israel will be front and center, and that is true. But it will be a false time of peace, and if they even have peace, which in reading the judgments and things like that, especially with the opening of seal 2, how peace will be removed from the earth, peace will be taken. So whatever age that they believe themselves to be in, clearly they are not, and whatever they believe to be true will be false. It's the whole Antichrist proposition, he who comes in the place of to give them this false idea of whatever the real thing should be 7 years early, and it won't be true. So yes, Israel will be the recipient of God's focus again, but she will not have any kind of lasting peace or lasting authority or supremacy over the nations or anything like that. And we clearly find that out at the midpoint of the week in Revelation 11, 1 and 2, when discussing the temple. There was given me a reed like unto a rod. And the angel stood, saying, Rise, and measure the temple of God and the altar and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles. And the holy city shall they tread underfoot 42 months. And that is a reference to the second half of the 70th week. So we clearly know that the fullness of the Gentiles cannot possibly have come in if the Gentiles are running amok for the last 42 weeks of the 70th week. Last 42 months, sorry. The last half of the 70th week, last 3.5 years. So we know that that the fullness of the Gentiles cannot have come in with the rapture, because the rapture will have happened 3.5 years before that point. 7 years before the second coming. So then we go to Revelation 14. And this was a point that I very, very briefly touched on. And I should have touched on it more, because if I had, I would have gone through the passages of scripture that I'm going to go through tonight. But it didn't occur to me until I was having a conversation in comments. And I thought, oh, I should have talked about that. But I'm glad I didn't, because I actually have another passage that I want to talk about that I hadn't thought about until this morning. So everything happens for a reason. But we go to Revelation 14. This is Jesus judging the earth, reaping the earth. In the second half, second half of the week, that second period of 42 months. That was just mentioned about the Gentiles treading the holy city. That's the period of time in question here in Revelation 14. And when we talk about fullness of the Gentiles, we're talking about a filling up of, a completion of, in time and in number, as people think. Joel 3, that number or that amount will become much more clear as to the fullness of this event or this period of time or this idea. All of these ideas are going to hopefully, or all of these passages of scripture are hopefully going to bring this idea further together, as I hope that it will, to make this abundantly clear that the fullness of the Gentiles is not a reference to the rapture of the church. It's a reference to the end of everything that what Jesus is essentially going to put an end to when he returns at the second coming. We talked about Babylon, the judgment of Babylon. I'm going to touch on that again, because that's the last thing that happens before the salvation of the Jewish nation, which is the last thing that happens before the second coming, as discussed in Revelation 16, 18, and 19, which I talked about last night in the part 1. But Revelation 14 actually gives us a precursor to that. So I'm going to start in verse 14. And again, this is talking about the events of the second half of the week. This is the reaping of the earth via the bowls of wrath being poured out. And in chapter 15, we also find, and I did touch on this point last night, that the fullness of God, the wrath of God is filled up in those 7 last judgments. And that wrath of God is what is being dispensed, or what we're shown being dispensed in these verses in Revelation 14, which will lead to a singular event that discusses a fullness. So Revelation 14:14. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud one sat like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come for thee to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. And another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, he also having a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had the power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, saying, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vine of the earth, for her grapes are fully ripe. So going to the grapes of the earth being fully ripe, the time for harvest. And that's going to be discussed in Joel 3 in just a few minutes. And the angel thrust in his sickle into the earth, and gathered the vine of the earth, and cast it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress, even under the horse's bridle, by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Revelation 14:20 actually corresponds directly to Revelation 19 and the events that we are told Jesus treading the winepress of Almighty God at the second coming. So Revelation 14:14 through 19 talk about the events of the second half of the week, that second period of 42 months, where the Gentiles are given power to tread the holy city for that 42 months. Revelation 14:20 actually specifically refers to the events of the second coming, when Jesus physically returns to earth and what he will do at that time. So again, I touched on this in the video last night, Revelation 15:1. And I saw another sign in heaven, great and marvelous, 7 angels having the 7 last plagues, for in them is filled up the wrath of God. When we're talking about fullness, the fullness of God's wrath is contained in these 7 bowls, these 7 vials. So we have to go to the last one to understand what events are tied to the finishing, the completion, the fullness of the wrath of God. What does that entail? So you've got the first 6 vials being poured out. What is the 6th of which is the gathering of the armies of the earth to the battle of Armageddon? What is the 7th one? And we talked about this last night. There is a sequence of events described here that is described in the Old Testament also, to show us a progression of events that is very specific to what we are shown in Revelation. What is this fullness? When does it happen? And obviously it relates to the salvation of the Jewish nation. I should have started by reading the verses in question where this actually came from. Romans 11:25 through 27. For I would not, brethren, that ye should be ignorant of this mystery, lest ye should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part is happened to Israel, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved, as it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. So clearly the blindness in part has happened to Israel until this event, until the fullness of the Gentiles. And then all Israel is going to be saved, and Jesus is going to come roaring out of Zion. So what is this fullness of the Gentiles that leads to the salvation of the Jewish nation? And that's where we get to Babylon, because that is what is entailed in part with the pouring out of the 7th vial, because that represents the finishing of the dispensation of the fullness of the wrath of God, which relates to the fullness of the Gentiles, because who is God pouring his wrath out on? We're going to go to Joel 3 in just a second. And then we're going to go to Zephaniah 2 and 3 to show the exact same sequence of events that Revelation shows us. And then to further support that this is a fullness of the Gentiles. This is a specific and singularly focused Gentile event. It's got nothing to do with the Jews, because the Jews are going to call upon Jesus and be saved. The fullness of the Gentiles relates to the wrath of God being poured out on unbelieving Gentiles, which is the opposite of the salvation of the Jewish nation. So again, when we go to Revelation 16, talking about the 7th vial being poured out, this is Revelation 16, beginning in verse 17. And the 7th angel poured out his vial into the air, and there came a great voice out of the temple of heaven from the throne, saying, It is done. Well, how is it being completed? What are those last things tied to that last vial? And there were voices and thunders and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such as was not since men were upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided into 3 parts, talking about Jerusalem, and the cities of the nations fell. This is going to be really important when we go to Zephaniah. It's going to show the falling of the cities of the nations. This is where all of those cities are listed. Jeremiah 6 through 50. The last of which is Babylon, but it lists a whole bunch of other cities. Amos 1 and 2 talk about all of those cities. Zephaniah, Obadiah, there's a whole bunch of them that talk about what cities are going to fall prior to Babylon. Babylon being the last. Again, Jeremiah 49 is a really popular passage. Damascus is included in those. All of these cities of the nations are going to fall at this point. just prior to the second coming. And great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So you've got the seventh vial being poured out. This is after all of the armies gather to Armageddon. The seventh vial being poured out. And Jerusalem is divided into three parts. The cities of the nations fall, and great Babylon comes in remembrance to be destroyed. Well, Revelation 17 tells us who destroys Babylon, and that is the army that is mustered by the Lord, which is the army of the beast and the 10 kings. The 10 kings give their power to the beast for 1 hour, and they hate her, the city, and they destroy her. They burn her with fire. Why? Because God put it in their heart to do that, to fulfill his will. So then Revelation 18 describes the lament and the mourning and the absolute devastation of the people that witness the destruction of Babylon, because Babylon is the center, the hub of everything that will go on, at least in the second half of the 70th week. When you go to Zechariah 5, it talks about how wickedness will be established upon its base in the land of Shinar. Shinar is where the Tower of Babel was back in Genesis 10, 11, the original one world everything, and that will be revived in the end times. And so the one world everything will be centered in this place that is being destroyed, utterly devastated. The smoke of her torment will ascend forever and ever. And so then these people are going to be like, what do we do now? There's literally nothing they can do, and everything that they had, all their eggs in this one basket, are completely broken. And there's nothing that they can do. But the good part about that is they don't have to worry about it, because Jesus is about to come back. I mean, obviously that won't be happy for them, but it'll relieve their worry about what do we do now, because they won't have to worry about that. I know that's mean of me to say, but whatever. So then Babylon is destroyed. And then in Revelation 19, you have the second part of that sequence of events. You've got the destruction of Babylon, which is the city that represents everything anti-God. And then you have the salvation of the Jewish nation pictured. Well, everybody's, really excited that Babylon was judged. And then you have the salvation of the Jewish nation pictured in Revelation 19, 7 and 8. The marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready. To her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, white and clean, for fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. So she joined the ranks of the spiritual seed, the natural seed becoming part of the spiritual seed. She joined the ranks, and she gets to go into the millennial kingdom as a result of that. We'll discuss that even more when we get to Matthew 25 in just a little bit, because we're going to go there too to impress upon people who might really be skeptical of this idea that the fullness of the Gentiles is up to and including the events of the second coming. So Babylon's destroyed, Israel comes to saving knowledge, and then Jesus comes back. Revelation 19:11, I saw heaven open, and behold a white horse, and he that sat upon him was called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he doth judge and make war. So then we're going to go to Joel 3. No, actually we're going to go to Isaiah 13 first, because this is what really, really helps us understand that the destruction of Babylon happens at the very, very end, and it leads into the second coming, the return of Jesus Christ. Literally, you've got Babylon destroyed in Revelation 18 and Jesus coming back in Revelation 19. It doesn't talk about the salvation of the Jewish nation in Isaiah 13, but it does support that sequence of events, judgment of Babylon leading into the second coming. So let's take a gander at Isaiah 13. Starting in verse 1, the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see. Lift ye up a banner upon the high mountain, exalt the voice unto them, shake the hand, that they may go into the gates of the nobles. I have commanded my sanctified ones, I have also called my mighty ones for mine anger, even them that rejoice in my highness. The noise of a multitude in the mountains like as of a great people, a tumultuous noise of the kingdoms of nations gathered together. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. And that goes into Revelation 17, where it talks about, I think I still have that open, where it talks about the 10 horns which thou sawest on the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, for God hath put in their hearts to fulfill his will, and to agree, and to give their kingdom unto the beast, until the words of God should be fulfilled. And the city which thou sawest is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. So Babylon is a city, and she's destroyed by the 10 kings and the beasts who rose to power off of her back, who hate her and decide to burn her with fire because God put it in their hearts to do that. And that's what we're learning in Isaiah 13. The Lord of hosts mustereth the host of the battle. They come from a far country, from the end of heaven, even the Lord, the weapons of his indignation to destroy the land. Howl ye, for the day of the Lord is at hand, and it shall come as a destruction from the Almighty. Therefore shall all hands be faint, and every man's heart shall melt, and they shall be afraid. Pangs and sorrow shall take hold of them. They shall be in pain as a woman that travaileth. They shall be amazed at one another, their faces shall be as flames. Behold, the day of the Lord cometh, cruel both with wrath and fierce anger, to lay the land desolate, and he shall destroy the sinners thereof out of it. So we see the destruction of Babylon by the forces that God puts in their heart to do his will, leading into the second coming of Christ, which is exactly what Revelation shows in chapter 18 and then 19. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. And I will punish the world for their evil and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will cause the arrogancy of the proud to cease, and lay low the haughtiness of the terrible. I will make a man more precious than fine gold, even a man than the golden wedge of Ophir. Therefore I will shake the heavens, and the earth shall remove out of her place in the wrath of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his fierce anger. And then it goes in to talk about how Babylon will never be inhabited again, but the wild beasts of the desert shall lie there, and their houses shall be full of doleful creatures, and owls shall dwell there, and satyrs shall dance there. And the wild beasts of the island shall cry in their desolate houses, and dragons in their pleasant places, and her time is near to come, and her days shall not be prolonged, talking about Babylon. So then, before I go to Joel 3, which is kind of the capstone on understanding that this is the fullness of the Gentiles, these events, the dispensation of the bowls of wrath, the final of which is Babylon, and it leads to Jesus treading the winepress of the wrath of Almighty God. In that winepress, it's full. Joel 3 is really going to be the capstone on that, but I want to go to Zephaniah 2 and 3 to help us really understand the sequence of events here, which is the destruction of Babylon, the salvation of the Jewish nation, and then the return of Jesus Christ at the second coming. I have to find it. Okay, so Zephaniah 2. And this goes into what I was talking about, Joel 2:15. Joel 2:10. And I refer to the book of Joel a lot when discussing end times because it's really, really important to the sequence of events. The day of the Lord comes. It's great and very terrible, who can abide it? Well, then you see those specifically called out who will be able to abide it because they come to saving knowledge in Jesus. That's where we pick up in Zephaniah 2, is we're being told that they come to saving knowledge so they can be hid in the day of the Lord's fierce anger. And then we see the day of the Lord's fierce anger and the salvation of the Jewish nation in the next chapter in Joel 3. So Zephaniah 2 is going to kind of piggyback on Joel 2 and 3 and show us the same sequence of events. But more specifically, to the point I was making, Zephaniah 2 and 3 show us the same sequence of events that Revelation does. Gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, talking about Israel, before the decree bring forth. And this is relates to Joel 2. And it says, the day of the Lord is cruel with, I'll just read this so I don't have to summarize it. Hosea, Joel. These minor prophets are so small. It's hard to find them. Okay, so Joel 2. Same language used in Isaiah as we just read. The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. And the Lord shall utter his voice before his army, for his camp is very great. For he is strong that executeth his word, for the day of the Lord is great and very terrible, who can abide it? Well, then it talks about the salvation of the Jewish nation. So catching up to the same idea in Zephaniah, gather yourselves together, yea, gather together, O nation not desired, before the decree bring forth, before the day pass as the chaff, before the fierce anger of the Lord come upon you, before the day of the Lord's anger come upon you. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be that ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. So same thing. It's like the day of the Lord is coming. It's going to be great and very terrible. Who's going to be able to stand through it? Well, those who have been saved and spared. So that's the admonition being given here in Zephaniah, is it's going to be bad. Pray that you can be hid in that day. Well, how do you get hid? By coming to saving knowledge in Jesus, grace through faith. So then it's going to go into explain what is going to happen as a result of the end times leading up to and including the second coming, the events of this last day. So this is where we get into the tie of Revelation, because it said that the seventh vial was poured out into the air, and there came a voice out of heaven saying, "It is done." There was an earthquake that affected Jerusalem. The city was split into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell. And then great Babylon came into remembrance before God to give to her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So here we see the cities of the nations falling as a result of the pouring out of the seventh vial, as stated in Revelation 16. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe to the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, the land of the Philistines. I will even destroy thee, and there shall be no inhabitant. These are also mentioned in Psalm 83. Some of these, not all of these, but same thing, same timing, same events. And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds and folds for flocks, and the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening, for the Lord their God shall visit them and turn away their captivity. I have heard the reproach of Moab, the revilings of the children of Ammon, also mentioned in Psalm 83, whereby they have reproached my people and magnified themselves against their border. Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, surely Moab shall be as Sodom, and the children of Ammon and Gomorrah as Gomorrah, even the breeding of nettles and salt pits, and a perpetual desolation. The residue of my people shall spoil them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. This shall they have for their pride, because they have reproached and magnified themselves against the people of the Lord of hosts. This is exactly what Psalm 83 talks about, is that talking about God to do unto these people groups as he did unto, you go back to Judges, it talks about them, all of these people who attempted to get at Israel because they're enemies of God. And so now you see the judgment of those. And in the time period, it relates to the fullness of the Gentiles. These are all Gentiles who stood opposed to the people of God. And now you see the fullness, the dispensation of wrath against these people. This is part of the fullness of the Gentiles, exactly what that is talking about, the fullness of the wrath of God being dispensed against the Gentiles. The Lord will be terrible unto them, for he will famish all the gods of the earth, and men shall worship him, every one from his place, even all the isles of the heathen. Ye Ethiopians also, ye shall be slain by my sword, and he will stretch out his hand against the north. This relates to Joel 2. He will remove the northern army afar off. He will stretch his hand against the north and destroy Assyria, and will make Nineveh a desolation and dry like the wilderness. And a flock shall lie down in the midst of her, all the beasts of the nations. Both the cormorant and the bittern shall lodge in their upper lintels of it. Their voice shall sing in the windows. Desolation shall be in the thresholds, for shall uncover the cedar work. This is the rejoicing city that dwelt carelessly, that said in her heart, I am, and there is none beside me. How is she become a desolation, a place for beasts to lie down in? Everyone that passeth by her shall hiss and wag his hand. Well, what's he talking about? Babylon. That's exactly Assyria, Nineveh, Babylon, all of that's related. And that's the link to Isaiah 13 that I read a little bit earlier, where it talks about it'll be a desolation for like all kinds of evil and foul inhabitants, never to be inhabited again. Isaiah 13 talks about that. And that is also the link here in Zephaniah 2. So you have Israel's going to have to do this in order that she's spared in this day. Okay, that admonition, that warning's been given. So now he's talking about what's going to happen in that day. Well, the cities of the nations shall fall, and then Great Babylon is going to come in remembrance. Great Babylon is coming in remembrance, talking about the references to the destruction of Assyria and Nineveh, a desolation like a dry wilderness, and then the animals that will house there in this desolation that will not be built up. So again, this is a sequence of events that's being linked to Revelation and the pouring out of the seventh vial. So then what we're going to come to next is the next thing we're shown in Revelation. So in Zephaniah 2, 4 through 12, you have the cities of the nations falling. You've got Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Philistines, Ammon, Moab, Ethiopia. Those are the cities of the nations falling. And then the reference to Babylon, Assyria, Nineveh, that kind of stuff. And the rest of the chapter, verses 13 through 15. And then in Zephaniah 3, woe to her that is filthy and polluted, to the oppressing city. She obeyed not the voice. She received not correction. She trusted not in the Lord. She drew not near to God. This is also talking about Babylon. Her princes within her are roaring lions. Her judges are evening wolves. They gnaw not the bones till the morrow. Her prophets are light and treacherous persons. Her priests have polluted the sanctuary. They have done violence to the law. The just Lord is in the midst thereof, and he will not do iniquity. Every morning doth he bring his judgment to light. He faileth not, but the unjust knoweth no shame. I have cut off the nations. The cities of the nations shall fall. Revelation 16:7 file. I have cut off the nations also a reference to Gentiles. Their towers are desolate. I made their streets waste, that none passeth by. Their cities are destroyed, so that there is no man, that there is none inhabitant. I said, surely thou wilt fear me. Thou wilt receive instruction, so their dwelling should not be cut off. Howsoever I punished them, but they rose early and corrupted all their doings. Therefore wait ye upon me, saith the Lord, until the day that I rise up to the prey. For my determination is to gather the nations. Joel 3. That I may assemble the kingdoms, to pour upon them mine indignation, even all my fierce anger. For all the earth shall be devoured with the fire of my jealousy. For then will I turn to the people of pure language, that they may call upon the name of the Lord, to serve him with one consent. And that is exactly why Gog and Magog has to happen before. Has to bring Israel back to one, so that they can be judged as one and eventually saved as one. And they are not one right now. One people with one consent. From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughters of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering. In that day shalt thou not be ashamed for all thy doings, wherein thou hast transgressed against me. For then I will take away out of the midst of thee them that rejoice in my pride, and thou shalt no more be haughty because of my holy mountain. I will also leave in the midst of thee an afflicted and poor people, and they shall trust in the name of the Lord. The remnant of Israel shall not do iniquity nor speak lies, neither shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth, for they shall feed and lie down, and none shall make them afraid. The rest of that chapter talks about what happens to Israel as a result of being saved from judgment. So then we go to, so hopefully that helped understand the sequence of events and how the destruction of Babylon is tied into the second coming, and how these are all judgments of the nations. But we'll go to Joel 3. And this, if the Gentiles part, the fullness of the Gentiles part wasn't clear before, hopefully it will be after we read this chapter. Joel 3:1. For behold, in those days and in that time when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I also will gather all nations, just like Zephaniah 3 was talking about. I will gather all nations, again a reference to the Gentiles, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. Going into verse 9. Here is the fullness of the Gentiles. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war, wake up the mighty men. Let all of the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there I will sit to judge all the heathen round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Going back to Revelation 14. Come get you down, for the press is full. Talking about fullness. The vats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of decision. The sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion and utter his voice from Jerusalem. And the heavens and the earth shall shake, but the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. So shall you know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall no strangers pass through her any more. And this is exactly what Romans 11 is talking about. For I would not, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own conceits, that blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And I'm not going to go over this again, but the blindness in part happened in Luke 19:42 at the triumphal entry. It will be lifted. Daniel 12:4 talks about this, talks about the sealing of the book to the time of the end, when knowledge shall, many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Go to Isaiah 29, and it talks about the lifting of that and the salvation of the Jewish nation as a result of increase of understanding. And when that happens, which is directly before the second coming, which again is what Revelation 19:7 and 8 and Revelation 19:11 show. And so all Israel shall be saved. As it is written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. Matthew 25, the judgment of the sheep and goats. This is the judgment in the valley of decision. This is the reading of the hearts to understand their will. The determination of the people who are alive at the second coming, whether or not they will go into the millennial kingdom. This is a purely and strictly Gentile judgment. The valley of decision, the valley of Jehoshaphat. The treading of the winepress of the wrath of God, based on the heart condition. Explained by Matthew 25 at the second coming, starting in verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations. Again, all nations is a reference to the Gentiles. And he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. We will be made very, very clear that the all nations is a reference to Gentiles as we make our way through this. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, and the goats on his left. Then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. What is the qualification for being considered a sheep in the sheep and goats judgment? For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in. Naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick and in prison, and ye visited me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, and fed thee, or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. This is the point at which the Genesis 12:3 will take place. Part of it. See, and I was discussing this in the part 1. Talked about the Abrahamic covenant having 3 parts. The first is the land covenant. The second is the natural seed, and the promise of the natural seed that would number as the sands of the sea and the stars of the sky. And the third is that the Messiah would come through his line, and that in him all the nations of the earth would be blessed. But regarding the spiritual seed, It says, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, and in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Talking about the spiritual seed, the Messiah, and the heavenly promises that we be gifted through faith. Genesis 12:3, the fulfillment of the I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee, is fulfilled in the judgment of the sheep and goats here in Matthew 25. This is exactly what we're seeing. The righteous, the sheep, those who blessed Israel will be blessed by being given entry into the promised land, or into the millennial kingdom. And those who cursed Israel will be forbid entry into the millennial kingdom. That is exactly what is happening here, is the bless them, I will bless thee, and curse them, I will curse thee. It's got to do with the treatment of Israel. And the king shall say unto them, this is the sheep, those he placed on the right hand, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me. Then shall he say unto them on the left hand, depart from me, ye cursed. Blessing, I will bless them, and cursing, I will curse them. Depart from me, ye cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me no meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me no drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in, naked, and ye clothed me not, sick and in prison, and ye visited me not. Then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hungered, or athirst, or a stranger, or naked, or sick, or in prison, and did not minister unto thee? Then shall he answer them, saying, verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye did it not to one of the least of these, ye did it not unto me. And they shall go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The fullness of the Gentiles relates to the final judgment before going into the millennial kingdom. It's got to do with the events that will be completed, fulfilled with the pouring out of the vials of the wrath of God, the final of which is the cities of the nations falling, and great Babylon coming into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of the wine and the fierceness of his wrath. Then you see the excitement over the righteous judgment of the city that stood against God and deceived all nations by her sorceries. For in 1 hour she is come to naught. And the whole world being distraught over that, because the central hub of everything is destroyed. Then you have the salvation of the Jewish nation, and then you have the return of Christ to save Israel and to judge the wickedness that has caused the winepress of the wrath of God to overflow. And the winepress is trodden without the city up to the horse's bridle for a space of 1,600 furlongs, the distance from Basra to Megiddo. That is the fullness of the Gentiles. And then Israel will take her place at the head of nations in the millennial kingdom. Her rightful place. Isaiah 61. Isaiah 61:9, and their seed shall be known among the Gentiles, and their offspring among the people. All that see them shall acknowledge them, that they are the seed which the Lord hath blessed. And that is Israel. Jesus will rule from Israel, from Jerusalem, on the throne of David. Israel will be the head of nations in the millennial kingdom. God's focus will shift back to her so that he can, so that the 70th week can commence and ultimately bring the salvation of the Jewish nation. But they will not be made the head of nations until the millennial kingdom, until the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. And that comes just prior to and including the second coming of Jesus. So the fullness of the Gentiles has nothing to do with the rapture of the church, and everything to do with the events that lead up to and include the second coming, which include the salvation of the Jewish nation. Just as Romans 11:25 through 27 says that it does. So hopefully that's shorter than before. There's no one in chat. Okay. So I hope that part 2, if you had remaining questions, clarified it. I am going to do a video in the near future that talks about the potential timing of the rapture. I have to consider how I want to go about that, because I don't want to just say, this is not about the rapture. This is not about the rapture. This is not about the rapture. Yeah, we understand the rapture is pre-trib. I've done a recent video about that. A couple, actually. But if all of this stuff is not about that, then how can we have any idea when it might happen? So I'll talk about that coming in the near future, because I don't want to take everyone's hope. If these verses aren't talking about that, then what does? And I don't want people to not be excited and not looking forward to it. So maybe we'll talk about potential timing of that and see what we can come up with. So if you have questions or comments, leave them. But that is the fullness of the Gentiles. What is it? So Revelation 16, 18, 19, Joel 3, Isaiah 13, Zephaniah 2 and 3, a whole bunch of other of other passages in the Bible. Old Testament is replete with understanding about this timing, what the fullness of the Gentiles is. So if you have a question or comments, let me know. Thank you for your time and your attention. I hope you guys have a good rest of your night.